there. Welcome. So nice to see you. It's nice to see already that my friend Sal and also Mr. Parker are there in the chat. And so welcome, everybody. We're going to talk a little bit about some myths today. And the first thing I want to mention is one person that I really admire. That person is Dr. Thomas Sowell. And what I admire about Dr. Sowell is that he likes to rely on facts. And when he started looking into the facts, he realized that there were a lot of myths outside being perpetuated by a number of people, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about some of the myths that are out there, and we're going to dispel, we're going to help to disabuse you of some of these myths in case you've been fallen prey to them. And so the first thing I'm going to do is, let me go ahead and share my screen here, so you can see what we're going to be talking about today. So here we go. Okay, so I'm going to go back to start from the beginning. We're going to talk a little bit about a bunch of different myths, but let me just get back up here to the top. Hopefully you guys can see this. Let me check. Yes, I can see you can see this. We're going to start up here. So I will start with my source, but we're going to talk about a few things. One of the things we're going to mention is the Republicans. A lot of people think that the Republicans are the party of evil. They seem to think that. I was under that myth for a little while there. And then I came to realize that actually the Republicans were the ones who fought to end slavery. They were the ones who fought to end the suppression of women, not allowing women to vote. Republicans were behind those measures. They were also in a much larger percentage behind Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, in case you didn't know that. And so that's a little fact that I think is pretty important for people to know. I would say that I don't believe the notion that the Democratic Party suddenly flipped. I believe the notion that the Democratic Party has still retained some of its racist views. Another thing we'll talk about today is the gender pay gap. I'm going to get into that in a moment. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the fact that eagles and turtles here in the United States have more rights to life than humans. It sounds very strange, doesn't it? It sounds like it flipped on us a little bit. Why would we give eagles and turtles more rights than humans? Well, if you're an unborn human, you have really no rights. You could be aborted pretty easily by your mother. And you're not given the right to life that has been guaranteed in the Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence. You're not given any of that. So one of the things that we want to point out is that a human life begins at conception. Any scientist worth his salt will admit that to you. All human life begins at conception. There's no arbitrary point during the birthing process or any other time during the cycle of pregnancy where suddenly the human becomes a human. The human is human all the time. And it also is not somehow, personhood is not magically conferred at some point during the pregnancy. Another thing we're going to talk a little bit about is Chinese, and are they playing fairly? Well, one of the things that's really interesting is that we have people who are actors right now who are standing up for China. And they're saying things like Taiwan is not really a country, when of course Taiwan is a country, but it's a country that China wants to take over. And we also have Chinese taking a lot of our debt. So Chinese are sort of controlling us in a way. In case you didn't know, we make about $4 trillion here in the United States. The US government collects that amount mainly in taxes, mainly in personal taxes, and mainly from the most wealthy. So the most wealthy pay the lion's share of the taxes in the top 1%. We have $4 trillion that we bring in, and we pay out about $4 trillion. That's what they talk about when they talk about balancing the budget. However, we're $27 trillion in debt. To put that in perspective, imagine if you were making $40,000 and your expenses totaled $40,000 and you were $270,000 in debt. And that number, the debt number, keeps rising. Now, if you go back into history, this is not a Republican or a Democrat thing. This is something that's just happened especially since FDR's time. The debt has risen dramatically over the years, up to $27 trillion, but we haven't really had any years except for the 1950s when it's declined a little bit. Another thing that I want to talk about is this idea of universal basic income. Would it be a good idea? There are people, politicians, people like Andrew Yang, who've proposed that we should just give everybody, and we have 331 million people here in the United States, we should just hand out to everybody, regardless of income, $500 per month. And some say, oh, that's great. It'll reduce the bureaucracies here in the United States. if we do that, because the bureaucracy associated with welfare programs where they have what they call means-tested programs. Now, means how much money you're making, your means. And so when they say you have a means-tested welfare program, what it means that at a certain amount of money, at a certain level, you are able to collect welfare. You're able to collect money. One of the problems with these kind of programs, and people have discussed this for years, especially going back to 1996 when we had some welfare reforms, one of the big problems is many of these programs are in place and they influence people to not get married. In fact, over half of Hispanic babies that are born out of wedlock. Over 70% of Black babies that are also born out of wedlock. And a lot of this has been perpetuated by welfare programs in many cases. If you're born out of wedlock, you're often raised by a single mother who really doesn't have a way to also raise you and go to work. So she's put in a very difficult situation. But the welfare programs, the way they're structured, there's more of an incentive not to go to work. And we're seeing that today. Right now, a lot of people in certain types of jobs are deciding not to go to work and to keep collecting unemployment. Many of them are benefiting from the extra surge that they received when Joe Biden and Trump sent out the checks, the stimulus checks. The problem with the stimulus checks, and I'm sure you've noticed this, is that this extra money just being printed and put into the economy has actually inflated things. Any of you, if you've tried to go to Home Depot and pick out flooring or pick out lumber, you've noticed a substantial surge in prices. Things are more expensive now at the grocery store. And you're probably noticing that. And that's what happens when you just pump money into an economy. Inflation occurs. And the problem with that is that sometimes that doesn't go up in line with how much money people are making. But what's interesting is a lot of people are offering pretty good money for jobs and people aren't taking them. That is the same thing that would occur if we had the universal basic income idea. Now, as I come over here, I just want to say hi to Susan. I see Susan in the chat. I see Mr. Parker's talking, St. Tommy, Stripper Liquor. So we've got some good people in the chat. So welcome. Now, I also want to talk about, before I get into my slides here, that I want to show you some employment statistics, some really interesting stuff. Before I get into that, I want to also talk to you about Venezuela. Now, Venezuela is a socialist country. When Hugo Chavez got into office, he waited till about 2007 and 2008. And he really was talking about how awful the wealthy people were. He demonized the wealthy people. He really focused on them quite a bit. They were the celebrities. Anybody who was an elite, he was demonizing, especially if they had white skin. He talked about the importance of his skin color. Doesn't that sort of remind you of Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, who said she's only taking interviews from Black or brown journalists? It's a little obnoxious. And where are the people crying out and saying, hey, you're a racist? Why can't we interview you? Well, Hugo Chavez did some very similar things. And then right around 2007, 2008, 2009, he started nationalizing a bunch of different businesses. He took over oil. He kicked 18,000 employees of a large oil company out. Kicked 18,000 people out and replaced them with his cronies who had no idea how to run that kind of a company. And of course, they drove it into the ground. He drove a shipping company into the ground. He drove a tourist business into the ground. He drove a bunch of businesses into the ground. As we sit here today, the National Survey of Living Conditions by Andres Bello Catholic University said that currently 96% of Venezuelans live in poverty, and 70% of those are in extreme poverty. Okay, Chavez died a millionaire, by the way. Only 3% of people who live in Venezuela right now are what they call food secure. You see, socialism does not pay. And guess who is also quite wealthy is Maduro and any of his pals. So a few people in the country are extremely wealthy. The vast majority of people in the country are not. Now, there are some parallels between what's going on in Venezuela and what we see here in the Democratic Party in the United States. Notice the demonization of people based on skin color. That's how Hugo Chavez started. Notice that they want to have bigger business. They have this $8 trillion plan where they're going to take over more parts of our infrastructure. Okay, they want to have a climate change agenda. And the climate change agenda is essentially going to put them into a position of power, even if they don't have the knowledge to run these companies. Joe Biden would appoint his friends. It's very similar. It's very similar the way that Joe Biden defends China and says that China, it's their culture, man. Their culture, with 1.8 million Uyghurs who are ethnic Muslims in concentration camps right now being raped and beaten. And it's just their culture, man. China has a big grip on us. They've got a lot of control of a lot of our debt. And it's a very dangerous situation right now. Yeah, UBI would be it could go very, very wrong. Yes, I agree with you, Stripper Liquor. UBI would be a socioeconomic disaster. And one of the reasons why is we can see it reflected right now in the economy with a lot of people who've decided that they are going to live off the government and not bother to work because it feels to them that economically, it's more beneficial to them to do that. Why should they go to work when they can just get these checks from the government? Universal basic income could be that same thing. Say if you gave every person $500 a month and you've got a family of 4 and they say, hey, well, geez, we can live off $2,000 a month. Why should we bother working at all? And so what would happen was the very wealthy or the people who were designed or who would decide to work would be working to support all of these people who are living off the dole. Do you think that's a good system? Where has that ever worked? That hasn't worked. And what happens then is it's like Atlas Shrugged. If any of you have read that, I asked my students yesterday if they'd read Atlas Shrugged, and I was surprised to find that not a single one of them had read that book. Now I know it's 2,000 pages, but it's a classic. It's Ayn Rand's book, and she talks about how the very first line is, "Who is John Galt?" And John Galt was an entrepreneur. And the entrepreneurs fled this place when communists took over, and people were demanding that the entrepreneurs and the people who are working hard to make their living support them. It's ridiculous. Work is good for you. Even St. Paul made sure to tell the early Christians that they needed to work. That was very important. So I'm also going to talk a little bit about Jesus and some of the evidence we have towards that end. Right now, I'm going to do some of the things that people need to think about. So look at this. I have been promoting college majors and choosing an appropriate college major since I started teaching in a university, but also way before that. I was a business undergraduate. I earned an MBA and earned a PhD in business management. Actually, it's a PhD in business administration with specializations in human resource management and international management. And I worked very hard, and it's worked out really well for me. I'm very happy with my life right now and the type of job I have. I think it's amazing. I feel very blessed to be in the situation I'm in. But I also know that I had to work very hard for it. 5 years of torture in a PhD program. And I will say torture because it was extremely difficult. I had no time even to read outside news pretty much. I was completely immersed in academic journals. You had to memorize lots and lots and lots of academic journal articles to sit down to take the comprehensive exam. It wasn't easy, but it was a really good decision on my part. It's given my family a lot of security, and I highly recommend it for everybody else. I got the idea from my grandfather. He was a college professor too. He studied at Northwestern University, and he taught at Northern Illinois University. So anyway, I digress. So attending a university in the US, now this is one of the ways that you can get out of this notion. We can disabuse you of this notion that you need to be sitting home collecting checks from the government and universal basic income and supporting politicians with loony ideas like Andrew Yang. So we get to this from Statistica. Now these are the prospects. Now this figure is going back to a time to 2012 right here, if you can see this. And you're going to notice that, I'm just going to make sure these are actually moving, because one time I did this and my slides didn't move for you. So I'm going to, so you can see that in 2012, people felt that there were people who were feeling a little bit more confident that they would be able to have a financial future that's strong. I'm noticing that this is not moving. So let me just redo this for a second. Hold on. Okay, I'm gonna try that again because that screen was not sharing and I don't like when it does that. So here we go. Make sure you guys can see this. Now let's go to the page before. Okay, hopefully you'll be able to see this. All right, so unemployment rate in the United States. You can see right here. Good, you can see this page. I'm just double checking. Okay, you can see right here. Now this is going between 1992 and 2019. And of course we know we had the spike in unemployment, but this is also divided by college graduates versus other sorts of things. So the blue line right there is the highest unemployment rate, and that's for a person with less than a high school diploma. And then there's the high school graduate after that with no college, some college, associate's degree, and then the bachelor's degree. And you can just see that the effect of graduating from college is very beneficial. It's a good effect that it has on your unemployment rate. So lower unemployment for people who've gone to college. it seems like a no-brainer. You can also see the average weekly income of people 25 years and older by educational attainment. And of course, we have right here, the red line that you see is showing you that a bachelor's degree and higher has the highest average weekly income of $1,100 in 2009. Now, of course, this was back just in the heels of the recession. But in 2009, you saw $1,137 is the average income for a person with a bachelor's degree versus $728 for one with just some college. And then it goes down. A high school diploma is an average of $454. So you can just see that it's quite beneficial to go to college, graduate. You can also see right here of the median household income. Now, it's interesting, the doctoral degree, the median household income is $135,000 with a doctorate, but it's actually more with a professional degree. So like a lawyer or a doctor, something like that, you can have $160,000 median income. And then a master's degree is $110,000 median income, and a bachelor's degree is $93,000. So again, getting more education is a very good thing. So we'll get into some more statistics on that. So employed full-time, you can just see right here, again, we're looking at different statistics, and the people who are graduating have a better chance of being employed. Okay, I'm going to get back into that. So we could keep going into that, but I want to go into major. So employment rates of people with a bachelor's degree. Now, this again is 2009. I've got some of the data in this file go up to 2018, 2019. So I'm just going to keep going. But this is a Statistica package that I found. I get it on Statistica, actually online. I subscribe to that through my school. So health degrees, people, let's see how that says, 98% of people who have a health degree. So for example, nursing or something like that, they're likely to be employed. And it keeps going down, followed by education, agricultural and natural resources, biology and life sciences, business, law and public policy, physical sciences, and so on. It goes down to the bottom at arts at 92%. And so bachelor's degree tends to work out pretty well, even for the arts and the liberal arts and the humanities. Those are at the bottom. But the top majors, as I mentioned, going into health fields, that can be pretty well as far as getting a job. So some of the majors with the highest employment in 2009, again, genetics was one. Then the second is followed by mining and mineral engineering, followed by geological and geophysical engineering. So you can see how it just keeps going down. Now at the bottom there, which is still 94% at the bottom in agricultural economics, then followed up on top of that is petroleum engineering. So these are just some majors with very good employment rates, okay? And I'm just going to kind of jump through this a little bit until I get to master's degrees with the best job prospects in 2019 by mid-career median pay. And so you can see right here, the top one is finance. So finance master's degrees have a median pay of $125,208, followed by biomedical engineering, and that's $117,000. Computer science, very good major, $115,000. Information systems, also good, $110,000. Followed by statistics. So again, you get the idea, science, technology, engineering, and math. These are good majors, okay? Physical assistant follows that with $100,000 median pay. Then civil engineering, then nurse practitioner. Nurse practitioners, who knew that nurse practitioners made $94,000 on average? Very good job. And down follow that, health administration, and then occupational therapy. Occupational therapist, that's at the lowest here. That is a $71,000 median pay. So we go down a little bit. So other master's degree with the worst job prospects by 2019. The worst one is counseling, followed by social work, music, education. These are the lowest levels of pay. So the counseling one, the pay is only, oh my, is it what I'm thinking there? Okay, no, it's $55,000 for counseling. Social work is $59,000. Music is $60,000. Education is $62,000. That's going into this idea with, say, the K through 12 teachers. It's unfortunate, but where I live in Florida, K through 12 teachers start around $40,000 if they have a bachelor's degree. They earn more money if they have a master's or a PhD. They earn more money for doing that. But it's pretty low pay given the massive amount of stress and work that is put through in that particular field. And it tends to be one that's dominated by women. And that gets us into the gender pay gap notion. Okay, I'm also going to disabuse you of that. So the gender pay gap, I'm going to get into in a moment, but it talks about, oh, well, women are paid less than men all around the world. That's true. But the numbers that people usually use are uncontrolled. They don't control for the type of job. So we'll show you that to you in a minute. And that's why I'm showing you these jobs and the importance of choosing a major. If you care about making an income, choose the major that's going to pay. Now, if people do an internship, you have a better chance of getting a job. Okay, so the internships there is at the top and it goes down from there. And so there's a good benefit of that. A person who has no internship, so it says it, what year is this? 2012. A person with an internship, it's a $30,000 pay right out of school. And the person without the internship's 26. So that's a lot lower. So in the United States in 2013, the highest paid right here is architecture and engineering, followed by computer science and statistics and math, and then business, then health, then physical science. And so you can just see right there that the pay is better for the STEM fields and for business. And so think about that when you're choosing your major. So this just keeps going on and on and on. So I'm going to get here to the, here we are, average graduate degree in 2013. So again, we've got the sciences being up there at the top on this last chart. So here's the gender pay gap. How much do women make compared to men? I always used to start my class saying, name me a country in the world where women make more than men on average. And there's no country in the world where women make more than men on average. But in fact, if you look at the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, women make 82 cents on the dollar to every dollar that a man makes on average. But again, that's uncontrolled. So PayScale decided to control that information, meaning I'm going to control for the years of experience that you have, the years of education that you've acquired. I'm also going to control for the type of job that you choose, you know, whether it's going to be an administrative assistant versus a carpenter versus a person who's in a coal mine versus a person who's in forestry. I'm going to control for all of those very important factors. And also how many years you've been working, your tenure in an organization, your tenure in working, because a lot of women tend to leave their fields. Now, women on average, numerous studies have shown that they tend to work less hours than males in different fields. Numerous studies have shown that. Numerous studies have also said that a lot of women aren't as willing to negotiate as males. They're less interested in compensation. Numerous studies have also shown that women tend to choose fields like the K through 12 fields versus men tend to choose the STEM fields. There are more men in the STEM fields that I just showed you that make all that money. So as a female, I would highly advise, if you're interested in the STEM fields, to think about that if you're also interested in making a decent living. Okay. And think about business. I love business. It's interesting. It's super fun. I can't even highlight that enough. Yes, Spartan theology, they do manipulate the data to fit the narrative. That's what the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development does. Okay. So now let's think about, well, what about the racial pay gap? Okay, this is harder for you to see, but let me just tell you what's on here. The racial pay gap, once you've controlled for all of these very important factors, and they have shown, studies have also shown that people in these different racial groups, these different ethnicities, also tend to pick out different majors. Like you have fewer people who are Blacks, for example, going into some of the STEM fields, and Hispanics, the same thing. So we know the STEM fields tend to do really well. Now, guess what? A lot of Asian people do go into those STEM fields. And so look at here. What you see right here is you'll see a male versus female slide, and you're also going to see broken up by race. After we control for all of these very important factors, the range goes from 97 cents to $1.03. Who's making $1.03 to the white male, who makes on average, say, $1? If they hold the white male at $1, Asian females and Asian males tend to make $1.03 on average. If you go to Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, they're at the same pay as the white males. Okay, and all of the other groups are either 97, 98, or 99 cents on the dollar. So yes, there's a gap, but when you factor in that women maybe don't work as many hours and those kind of factors, and maybe people just choosing different areas and spending, not negotiating and those kind of things, this is quite explainable. So I don't think that we're seeing this whole huge issue that a lot of people keep putting forward. And the sad thing is when you do tell people this information, you share this information, they keep perpetuating the myth. Why? Why are they doing that? It's like people stirring the pot because they're unhappy with something about themselves in society. And so they decide that they're going to try to get you angry too. And there really isn't anything to be angry about with respect to the gender or the racial wage gap. Now, here's something as another myth. If you go back to the year 1800, you're going to notice from all these different accounts that 81% of the people in the whole world were in poverty, if it's defined as $1.90 or less a day. Okay, so 81% in 1800. Now that number has steadily decreased to today. You can see this divided up by country. Okay, you can see these are at the very bottom here on this chart are country names, and so you'll see that different countries have different levels, but they're all around, or they're all under, pretty much under, what's the highest there? The highest is about 20% in some countries, and we've got it all the way down to just under 5% in other countries. So the division here is the poverty's gotten much better over the years, except, of course, if you're in Venezuela, as I mentioned before, because in Venezuela, we have 96% of the country is living in poverty, and 70% are what they call extreme poverty. This is the least wealthy country now in Latin America, and it's the one with the most oil reserves. It's absolutely disgusting what Chavez did to this place. Absolutely disgusting. It's morally atrocious. I could go on and on about how awful I think all of this is. So yes, I want to say thank you to people in the chat here. I said, oh, so Spartan was saying the exact opposite. No, I'm using the data so that I can disabuse people of these faulty notions that they have with respect to some important topics. So I also want to talk a little bit about the idea that Jesus is a myth and we don't have, well, wait, so you shouldn't use old univariate analysis. Exactly, converse contender. I'm going to come back to the chat. So let me stop sharing this. Okay. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what evidence do we have for Jesus. Now, I was born and raised a Catholic. I left the church for a number of years. I came back because I started having spiritual experiences, and that tends to be what many people have when they come back to Christianity if they ever leave. And I didn't kind of leave. I was sort of floating around like a progressive, squishy progressive. I was thinking Eastern faiths were better and we all get to heaven, and it was sort of universalist in my views, and it was really just ridiculous. And so finally I was shown the light and I learned the truth. And I thought to myself when I first got on Twitter, but do we have enough evidence for Jesus' resurrection? I still was kind of squishy-washy, and I knew that I believed, even if we didn't have the evidence, like even if we didn't have historical evidence, I personally believed based on my experiences, but I really didn't know for sure. And I hadn't even bothered to look. I hadn't even read the entire Bible. I'd only even read a few verses here and there. I'd memorized Psalm 23 because I used a squirt pen and accidentally hit a bus driver when I was in the 6th grade. And so the nuns made me memorize Psalm 23, which is why this title of my account here is now Psalm 23 Apologetics. I shall walk through the valley of the shadow of death and I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Anyway, so that's one of the reasons why this is called Psalm 23. But anyway, so I was wondering if we have enough evidence, and we do. What's really exciting is we have 42 sources within 150 years of Jesus' resurrection around the year 33. And of those 42 sources, 9 of them are hostile secular sources. And from the 9 hostile secular sources, we have enough information. If we only had that, people like Suetonius and Josephus and Tacitus, if we only had that, we would know that Jesus was, he lived. We know that he was born of a virgin, where we're told that he was born of a virgin. Actually, we don't know from those 9 sources. Here's what we know from the 9. We know that they said that he performed miracles. He was capable. He was a wonder worker. He was a wise king. He was believed to be very just. He was crucified. Numerous sources have said he was crucified and that he died, and that the apostles said that they saw him alive. The apostles said that they did that. And then what happened with the apostles? People like James, who was Jesus's half-brother, people who had tried to stop his ministry like James. James ended up worshiping Jesus in the temple in Jerusalem, and he was crucified. I'm sorry, he was martyred according to Josephus, who is a hostile Jewish source. We also have people like Paul, who is Saul, who is preaching against Christians. He thought that this was the wrong sect. He thought they were doing all of the wrong things. And Jesus stopped him in his tracks on the road to Damascus. And Paul ended up preaching for Jesus for decades until he was beheaded by Nero. And then we have Peter, Jesus' rock. Jesus said, on this rock I will form my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail. Well, guess what? Peter, who had denied Jesus 3 times in a very embarrassing way, Peter also came to follow Jesus himself. came to believe fully in Jesus. And what he did was he preached for Jesus for decades until he was probably crucified upside down. But we know he was martyred, and we know he was martyred at the site right now of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. So guess what was born or built on top of that? The church. And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail. The gates of hell have not been able to take down the church. Now, if you haven't gone back to the book of Daniel and taken a look at the four kingdoms, the Roman kingdom is the one that we know that Jesus appeared in, and that's why people were expecting him at that time. That's why we had lots of people trying to claim that they were the Messiah, but their followings were put out. But as Gamaliel said, our followings were not put out. And I think I just mispronounced Gamaliel, so we'll just go with that. So I'm going to go to the chat and just see what comments you guys are having in here. So I see looks like a lively conversation. I want to say hi to Converse Contender and Thank You, Jesus, and Mr. Parker and Slam RN. Slam RN, I'll see what it says here. It says, like Benjamin S. Carson. Let's see if we can get this on the screen. Okay, like Benjamin S. Carson, who grew up in a single-parent household in the ghetto and became a world-renowned pediatric neurosurgeon. Yes, that's a great example. I'm so I have so much admiration for people who've been able to overcome like that. Carol Swain is another example. Dr. Carol Swain. She was raised in a ghetto-like environment. She was raised in a house that she said she had dirt floors, and they didn't even have shoes at one point. So they would keep them out of school for a while because they didn't have the shoes to get through the snow. She was raised extremely poor, and she ended up becoming a doctor. And so she's a very, very smart woman who's come a long way. Dr. Thomas Sowell, same thing. He was raised in Harlem. Okay, he was in Harlem and in sort of a not very wealthy area. And look what happened to him. Dr. Thomas Sowell has done quite well for himself. He's 90 or 91 right now. He's very old, and he's extremely sharp still. And so we have people like that. That's one of the great things about the United States. Rags to riches is quite possible. If you put your nose down and you work hard, you will succeed. And get educated. I just showed you a whole bunch of charts on getting educated and which fields you should consider. Now, I didn't name fields that I don't think you should consider. There's a lot of fields in the arts and the humanities, and that you should probably reconsider if you're planning on going into those fields. I had a friend, for example, who majored in history. And when he graduated, he found he didn't have any employment prospects. And so he changed his mind and he went back to school and he earned a law degree. I have another friend who spent over 10 years in a PhD program, finally getting out. So she had worked as a K through 12 teacher before that. She went through school. She went to Columbia in New York City. She graduated with an art history degree after spending 10 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars for this degree. What happened was when she graduated, she initially went to work in a museum, and she realized that she was earning much less pay than she could if she were a K through 12 teacher. So she went back to her K through 12 job. That's the kind of experience that I've seen. That is not a good deal. So some majors that actually are surprisingly good, though, are English. English is a pretty good major. I know two female CEOs of very large Fortune 500 organizations, such as Liz Smith, who was at Outback, and what was the other one? Mindy Grossman is another one who was at one point at HSN. They both came and spoke at my school. But they were English majors, but then they went and they earned MBAs. So the English major combination with the MBA is really powerful because of their communication skills. And so that's something that you might think about doing if you're going to do the humanities or something like that. You want to follow your passion. Think about adding on that MBA or an MS degree in one of the STEM fields, because that'll pay for you. That'll help you do well. And so those are a couple of fields. Another one, just to give some more examples, there's a female who follows me around on Twitter. Even though I've locked my account, she somehow is outside of the account, tweeting at me every so often. And she tells me she had a piano degree, and then they spent a few years on welfare after she graduated. There, again, choose your field well. This is an overriding theme. I've got lots and lots of anecdotes, but I could go on and on and on, because I've been in a university and immersed in that for a while. And I've heard the stories from my students, those who had these undergraduate majors that were underwater basket weaving and the like, something like that. They haven't fared very well trying to find a job. And people who've had these undergraduate majors right in business, a lot of them went out and did very well. Right now, what's a really hot major that if you're considering going back to school, it's cybersecurity. Every company right now has a need for cybersecurity. Now, especially the larger companies with a big web presence or with an intranet. those companies definitely need to have some sort of cybersecurity people in place, because you saw what happened with the pipeline and the hacks. Got a lot of hacking going on out there, a lot of phishing schemes, PHISH, a lot of phishing schemes. In fact, I just bought ExpressVPN. I don't mean to be an advertiser for them, and I'm not, but I just bought ExpressVPN so I could encrypt all of my data on the internet, because I don't want to be hacked myself. And I also feel that that's a good protection for my university, for me to have my data encrypt. And so I have this $99 for a year, and my data are encrypted. I should say data are, not data is. So that's the bottom line. But cybersecurity is a major that really pays off. With a 4-year degree, you don't even have to go past 4 years, and you can do very well. So I also had a recommendation for cybersecurity as a field, because I've seen people and how much money they can make right off the bat. So I've known a number of people who've made around $120,000 after graduating with a 4-year degree in cybersecurity, because organizations really need those people. We had to really ramp up our IT department at my university, because probably about 10 years ago, somebody hacked in and was able to access a lot of our names and information. And so they realized that we had to really step up the game. And so they did. And that's about the time that our president decided, hey, we better have a cybersecurity as a major and as a master's. So we have both right now. So I also want to say hi to other people in the chat. Susan says, name another country which you think is better, Mr. Parker, then maybe go live there. It's like, that's one of the things that I think is kind of very sad that I'm noticing, is there are a lot of people who unfortunately, I think our educators in some cases have steered people wrong, and they've convinced them that our country is bad and that we're founded on these evil platforms. And that's just not the case. We were founded, now our country, the 1619 Project fails to note that the US was a British colony then. That's not when our country was founded, when a handful of slaves came over here. Our country was founded in 1776, which you should know. And our founding fathers said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that we're endowed by our Creator with certain rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We're granted these amazing rights. Now, did they live up to them themselves? Well, no. Some of them, we had Jefferson, he had slaves, which is pretty awful. But let's not forget what happened. Finally, in 1865, slavery was abolished. And a lot of the abolitionists were people who were Christians. So the Christians played a big role, and the Republicans played a big role in the abolition of slavery. Okay, go back and look at your history books to see what the Democrats were up to back then. They were busy they were positive for slavery. So Democrats definitely wanted to keep slavery going. And thank God we were able to get rid of it in a very bloody civil war. So we have a history of people fighting against slavery. All kinds of people died during the Civil War fighting against slavery. Slavery is something we hate. Now, were everything perfect after that? No. We had the Jim Crow laws that were discriminatory, advocating for segregation between blacks and whites. Pretty awful. People were forced to sit in the backs of buses and use different bathrooms and all sorts of different things. So it wasn't until 1964 when Title VII of the Civil Rights Act was finally enacted. Now, interestingly enough, as I mentioned this act before, the Democrats, more Democrats, about twice as many Democrats voted against Title VII to give people equal rights. So you get employment rights. You're protected from discrimination in the workplace based on your race, religion, color, national origin, or sex. And then this past summer, the Supreme Court just added gender identity and sexual orientation to this list of protected groups. Okay, so we have those people are also protected. And so the thing that I wanted to bring up that's very important, and interestingly also, you might want to note who's included on the Supreme Court at this point. This is before Amy Coney Barrett. However, we had a majority of conservatives in the Supreme Court give these rights to protection for gender identity and sexual orientation. A majority conservative court gave the rights to those people, okay? And why did they do that? Well, they had cases like this one case. There was a case out of Georgia where this man was working for an organization. He was doing a perfectly fine job, and his employer decided to fire him after his employer found out that he belonged to some sort of gay organization. And so obviously it was pure discrimination based on the fact that he's gay. And so that is something that the Supreme Court decided we don't want to see that anymore. Okay, so we can't discriminate. So that's part of the group that's included. So I also wanted to add, I just want to say hi again to the people in the chat. Why is it that the states flipped in the South from voting to Democrats to Republicans? So I don't know why the states flipped in the South from voting from Democrats to Republicans. You'd have to probably ask people who live in places in the Deep South, and I'm not familiar with the Deep South. I can say that the Republicans, I can say a few of the things that occurred. One is some people decided to start voting for Democrats when people like FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, came into office. Now, he held 4 terms in office before we decided that you can no longer hold 4 terms. But what he did was he did a number of acts to try to get us out of the Great Depression, but it actually made the Depression worse. Okay, and I'm going to give you some factual information that you can use. In the 1920s, prior to his administration, we had the rates of tax on the uber wealthy were very high. And so the very wealthy people did not pay individual income taxes. They figured out ways to use the loopholes to exploit them. So for example, they would buy municipal bonds because they could sink their money into that and as a way to get tax exempt. Okay, so then what happened was they lowered the rate of taxes for these uber wealthy people down to around 20%. And suddenly all of these uber wealthy people started paying into the tax base. So anyway, that was one thing that shows that if you have taxes that are way too high, individual taxes, the people who have who can pay those will figure out ways to skirt them. Now, right now, the tax rate on people is on the most wealthy people is around 39%. Okay, so we have that. And a lot of people who are very wealthy have figured out ways to exploit municipal bonds and do things like that so they don't pay those very high taxes, relatively high taxes. So sometimes the higher taxes at the individual level don't work out to the government's favor. But what happened was there was a Smoot-Hawley. Okay, here's what happened. The stock market crashed in 1929. Let me get a little drink here. So the stock market crashed in 1929. And inflation initially spiked. And then inflation went, I don't mean inflation, I'm sorry. Unemployment initially spiked. And then unemployment went down to around 6%. And this is after the stock market crashed. And then what happened was Smoot-Hawley, Smoot, S-M-O-O-T, Hawley, H-A-W-L-E-Y. This idea that we're going to slap huge tariffs on all sort of imports. Okay, it's on something like 900 products. They decided to put tariffs on that. So what happened was a bunch of countries around the world decided that they would rebel against that by also punishing us in different ways. That is what drove us into the Great Depression. And as you know, we had tremendously high unemployment rates. So then FDR decided that he was going to start a lot of giveaways. And a lot of people needed that money because you had around 25% of people unemployed at one point, again, because of these ridiculous tariffs that had been imposed. And so one of the things that happened was he came out with Social Security system and the welfare system. And a lot of Democrats were behind this. Now, FDR is a Democrat. And so FDR decided in 1935 that the Social Security system should be put in place, which is one of the greatest Ponzi schemes of all time. Everyone pays into the system and they use that money for other things. You can see that money that goes into Social Security is part of our budget. Okay, so they take the money and they spend it on other programs. And so it's a tremendous Ponzi scheme, but I'm paying into it as we all are. We don't have a choice. We pay 6.2% of our income into it, and then our employer matches that at another 6.2%. But one of the things that occurred is he came about with that program. He decided that old people should be taken care of. And between then and the 1960s, a whole bunch of other welfare programs were put into place. And people in different ethnic groups and different became Democrats because they figured that the Democrats were the ones that could help them. And a lot of people started developing the perceptions that the Democrats were out to help people who were impoverished. And unfortunately, what happened was marital rates for people in these groups went way down. And because it went way down, because a lot of these welfare systems were designed to benefit people who were single more than they would benefit families, more than they would benefit married families. Now, since then, in 1996, Clinton came about with a bunch of measures to sort of eliminate the amount of lifetime poverty. They came up with the TANF, the temporary program for welfare. But one of the things that they also did is they decided to try to get the states to encourage people to get married. So some of the states have done a pretty good job at that and others haven't. But what we thought would be a good system, if you go back to the 1920s and 30s and you look at different ethnicities and you look at the percentage of kids who are born out of wedlock, it's extremely low back then for all ethnicities. Marital rates were much, much higher. But since these programs have come into place, we now see, again, I just mentioned earlier, People who are blacks have if you're black, is a child, 70% of children are born out of wedlock, and over 50% of Hispanics are born out of wedlock. And white people, it's also gone up. It's gone up for all groups. So unfortunately, this has just been a pretty bad deal. So a lot of these welfare programs people end up on those systems and sort of latched into them. So they're pretty awful in the long run. So I want to go to the chat. If anybody has any thoughts, questions, anything you wanted to add in here. Oh, Susan's back. So the federal government is horrendous in handling money. The private sector is much more efficient. And that's actually my point. That goes to when I've had people on my channel before. We talked about something like the Great Reset. And the Great Reset is something that was put out by the World Economic Forum last summer. And who is the World Economic Forum? This is a group of very wealthy people, very wealthy elite people. In fact, the lowest levels of payments to get into the World Economic Forum is around $60,000. That's what the poorer people pay to get in there, $60,000 per year. But the wealthy are in there, and they want to influence society, and they want to give themselves a lot of power. You see right now people like Bill Gates buying up tons of agriculture here in the United States and then leasing it back to farmers. We have people like Jeff Bezos, worth $200 billion. We have other people who have just billions and billions of dollars. So we've got a lot of people who are in power. So I'm not just saying that it's just big government. We've got problems here all around. So we've got problems with big government, but we also have some problems with some people who are in the 300 person group of billionaires here in the United States. People get very mad at those people. But it's interesting, those people actually pay a very significant portion of the taxes. So they do pay quite a bit of taxes. They pay much more than 1%, which is what they comprise. They're top part of 1%. But I just wanted to point out, so those people and government, what they want to do is they want to increase their own assets. You can see how Amazon has benefited from the pandemic. A lot of small businesses have gone out of business, and Amazon's been able to snap up that market share. And so we do have a problem with that. And that's one of the downsides of capitalism. Okay, one of the downsides of free markets. We don't have a better system, though. We don't have a better way to do things. But we do need to keep our eyes on what these larger business leaders and Google and Twitter and all of these different other companies that have control of what you're seeing. I mean, right now they could easily pull the plug on me. They could easily do that. But anyway, I digress. So I just wanted to point out my key points, just rounding this up. Key points are the idea that we're worse off than we ever have been is complete bunk, because you can go back to 1800 when 81% of people were living on less than $1.90 a day. Right now, only around 10% of people in the world are living on less than $1.90 a day. So that number keeps getting better and better and better. So by the measure of poverty, we're getting better. The idea that we have a gender pay gap is a false notion. The pay gap is so tiny. It's pretty much negligible. And it's based on things like people's choices. And it's based on things such as the number of hours that you work, whether you're going to negotiate, and all those kind of things. Another idea is we need to really keep our eyes on China. China is right now playing hardball. They're in there messing around with Hong Kong, and no one's doing anything about it. They're messing around with Taiwan, and everyone's looking the other way. And they've got 1.8 million Uyghurs sitting in concentration camps to be re-educated so that they can get them away from their Muslim faith. They're sterilizing those people and raping them. So that China is not playing fair. They're also getting some of our celebrities like John Cena to go around saying that Taiwan isn't even a country. I mean, why do they do that? Because John Cena wants to make sure that a movie he produces is still shown in China. So China is controlling him and controlling us in a way, because John Cena, people who admire him, listen to him, and he's like, oh, Taiwan's not a country. Of course, Taiwan is a country, but China wants to take it over. And so China is a pretty big dirtball. Another thing that I mentioned today was the universal basic income is an awful idea that would ending up with a bunch of people who are living off the government and getting obese. Okay, we've got a very big obesity problem here in the United States, and a lot of that is centered around places like Mississippi and Alabama, where you have a lot of welfare recipients. Okay, how many people are heavy in the United States? Well, we have about over 60% of the US population is heavy, is overweight. And of those, about 30% of those people are considered obese. Okay, so they're very heavy people. And a lot of it has to do with a number of factors. People like to say they don't have time to exercise, or they can't eat right because or they don't have the opportunity to buy good food. That's been a big argument. Well, They say, well, we don't have the Whole Foods grocery markets here in the slums. They don't, and that's true. They don't have good groceries. They might have places like a 7-Eleven around the bad parts of cities. But one of that is the motivation to open up a store to offer all kinds of fruits and vegetables and things like that when the store could end up getting ransacked. And so we saw what happened in the Walmarts in my area. A whole bunch of people ran into Walmart unchecked and just started stealing from them in Tampa. And we saw that all around the country. So what motivation do stores have to locate themselves in areas that are likely to be, riots breaking out? So that's going to be a problem. So that's another idea. So we don't want to have a large portion of our population dependent on the government and deciding that they're not going to work because they're getting checks in this universal basic income. That would also have a detrimental impact on people who are hard workers, who are trying to make ends meet, because of course taxes will be raised on the middle class. And of course taxes will be raised on the upper class. Everyone will be paying higher taxes in a universal basic income model, because we have 331 million people who, if we gave everybody $500 a month, that would be into the trillions, and it would be something that would be pretty awful. So some say, well, why don't we just tax businesses bigger? Well, why would businesses want to stay in the United States? If the taxes get a lot higher, they're probably going to think about leaving. And who are businesses anyway in the United States? 89% of businesses have less than 20 employees. Fewer than 20 employees, I should say. 89% of businesses have fewer than 20 employees in the United States. So taxing the businesses and the big man a lot of times hits the little guy. So that's another thing. Another fact that I just wanted to point out is we've got a lot of historical evidence outside and inside the Bible for Jesus. And so if any of you have doubts, you're wondering if your faith is true, and you want to know the truth, you've come to the right place. Jesus is the truth. He's the way, the truth, and the life. That's something that you want to think about doing. And the last thing that I wanted to mention today is talking about socialism and how awful it is and how it's destroyed Venezuela. As I noted, 96% of Venezuelans live in poverty and only 3% feel secure about their food. It's really, really rotten. Now, in case you're sitting there thinking, well, I just think that the Swedish model or the Danish model, those are better models. Well, take a look at this. In Nordic countries, people pay 25% value-added tax. Here in Florida, I pay 6% value-added tax, and they pay it on just about everything you buy. And they also pay taxes on cars in Denmark of 100%. So if you buy a $30,000 car, it's going to cost you $60,000 in Denmark. So taxes are very high. Plus the middle class in those countries pay extraordinarily high tax rates, personal tax rates. You make $60,000 in Sweden, you are going to pay about 60% in taxes. It's very, very high. So all of these taxes going to the government, yes, they take care of you from cradle to grave. And some Swedish people and Norwegian people, they really like these systems. But they're very small countries. Did you know that Norway is about 1/4 of the size of the state of Florida in population? Okay, 1/4. Only about 5 million people live in Norway. Sweden only has about 10 million people. These are very small, teeny little countries that aren't even as big as some of our states. They're just teeny, and they're very homogenous, hardworking people. Who are the slackers in Sweden? Very sadly, the Swedish government has started to limit the amount of people coming into the country because they realize that a lot of those people are coming in and they're not working. They're collecting the welfare on that welfare sort of state, and they're not working. So there's a lot of people who have come in from Arab countries, for example, and have decided that they're just not going to work. They're just going to live off the dole. And so that's not going to work out well for them. We see what happens to people when they don't work. It doesn't work out well. You end up sitting around and feeling sorry for yourself and getting on Twitter and getting mad at everybody else, and when you could be going out and working. So working is just really important. I also went over some of the pay for different college majors. I'd highly motivate you to get into the STEM majors if you can, or the business fields. Get into fields that pay good money. Legal fields, medicine, a lot of these pay very good money. So you want to consider that. And the last point is, I don't want to pretend and paint a glossy shimmer over what we also have are some examples of pretty greedy people in the world. And of course, we have some very greedy people at the top. Not only people like Hugo Chavez, who's since departed from us, but he died with a couple billion dollars to his name. So he had a lot of wealth while his people all perished. Let him eat cake, right? And we also have a lot of very wealthy business leaders here in the United States, like Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates. However, on the flip side, without these people, We wouldn't have all of the people employed at places like Amazon, where they have a minimum wage now of $15, or places like Microsoft or other places. So without these people to form these businesses and these entrepreneurs to benefit from the businesses, we wouldn't have the businesses. So despite the fact that they probably do make too much money and they should give back to society, and thankfully we do have places like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation giving back to society, they still, need to do a little bit more. I think they should do a little bit more. More philanthropy is always appreciated, but we can't force them to do any more, and we should not put our meat hooks into them to try to do that when they're the ones who are the entrepreneurs who came up with the great ideas. And we all have that same. We have the same potential to also be great entrepreneurs if we really want to. Think about how an entrepreneur thinks. They look out into the market, they look for an opportunity. The number one step in entrepreneurship is recognizing an opportunity. I have a friend whose dad invented this idea a long time ago. When people would get beer pitchers in bars, is they would put a bag of ice into the pitcher. That's how they would keep the pitcher beer cold. And my friend's dad invented this kind of a little round thing that hangs over the top of the pitcher. And it was like one of those ice packs. And he invented this and he sold it to a bunch of bars, and it sort of went viral. And so now they're very wealthy people over in Boca Raton. And that was his idea when he spotted a need. I mean, it could be a very silly need, but he got into it. There's lots of ideas out there. Think about something yourself that you could do, and then go major in entrepreneurship. That's another great major that I haven't really talked about that much. So yeah, minimum wage here in the state of Florida is about to go to $15 an hour, by the way. The national minimum wage is $7.25, but it's about to go to $15 by 2026. And that should have an interesting impact on whether or not young people are able to get employment. People like my kids who are 15 and 16. They've shown that the percentage of kids who, with the imposed minimum wage that also came through with FDR, the percentage of young kids in jobs in high school and working after school and working on weekends has declined significantly for all ethnicities. So kids will have a harder time getting jobs when people have to pay $15 an hour. They're not going to hire some kid who normally maybe they'd hire a kid just to help them out for the $7.25, and he goes around sweeping the floors or something. But for those kind of unskilled jobs, it's going to be difficult to find people. So on that note, I wanted to say thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate that you came by today. I hope that you'll like and subscribe. And I'm talking to my friend Joel Rodriguez about which people that we can interview, because we want to do some Friday interviews. And so please stay tuned for that. Also, if you'd like to come on here sometime, let me know and I will open this up. I'm always willing to open it up to friendly conversations, even across the table. So if there are people here who don't believe as I believe, or you have socialist beliefs, or you're a communist, or you're an atheist, or you're an agnostic, or you're Buddhist, whatever you are, or if you're Christian, or if you're a progressive Christian. I noticed there was a couple of progressive Christians here in the chat a little while ago. So whatever you are, if you're interested in coming in and chatting a little while, I'll gladly have you on. And so you can reach me by email at alwayslearning1225@gmail.com. Or you can just leave a comment here and I'll find it that way. So thank you again. You guys please like and subscribe, and do come again. Just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. And hi, Susan, Sal, and Mr. Parker, hanging it out. Have a great one, everybody.